I wanted to welcome all of you to the first BCFO Zoom presentation of 2024. Uh, just a reminder to please keep your microphones muted during the conversation. I'm sure there'll be time at the end for questions for Timothy. And, um, and with that, I want to welcome and introduce Timothy Jackson. Timothy began his love of nature growing up in rural England. At age 14, he moved to British Columbia, and in both locations, he met people from Kenya, which sparked his interest in East Africa. Over the past 24 years, Timothy has spent a total time of over 4 years on safari, where he has visited nearly every major national park and game reserve in southern and eastern Africa. Timothy is a partner of Jackson's African Safaris, a South African-based and registered safari company. And when not in safari in Africa, Timothy resides at home in Nelson, BC, planning his upcoming tours. And tonight, this presentation is titled African Birdlife, Insights into Migrations and Their Life Stories. Thank you for speaking to us this evening, Timothy. I'm looking forward to hearing your talk, and I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you, Nathan, very much. And thank you to all your team for working with me to make all the technical side of things come together here. So again, thank you, Nathan, and thank you for all signing up. I'm going to hop over to the main presentation just now, but because I need to change my screen with the presentation, I'm just going to share Google Maps with you just for a moment and have a look at the continent of Africa, which is obviously very large when you compare it to South America or Canada or any part of the world. And the areas that I will be focusing on mainly will be some photographs from Ethiopia, quite a lot from Kenya particularly, and some from Tanzania, and some from Botswana and Zimbabwe. A client of mine did a trip. So basically the second half of my presentation is going to be a combination of bird photographs with stories that I will share. That I've taken, but the other half of those photographs are of just one client of mine, Adrienne Buck from Vancouver, who I met at the Manning Park Bird Blitz many years ago, and she went on a trip and she shared a bunch of her bird photographs. And so I thought I'd give an insight as to what one person's trip looks like when you go out on a birding safari and the things that she saw and experienced. And the other half of my presentation, the first half, is a lot of incidents and stories and things which I've put together to create some thoughts about how we look at things in a way which will hopefully stimulate conversation and new ways of looking at things. But we'll get into that in the main presentation just now. But I wanted to look at the continent of Africa and just point out a few key things. So this is the Red Sea, where my mouse is moving, and you should see my mouse moving. Is that correct? Hopefully you can see my mouse moving. And that is part of the Rift Valley, which then goes through Ethiopia. And then it goes all the way through Kenya and all the way down through Lake Tanganyika right here. And I'm going to share a few bird photographs from Lake Tanganyika, which is right there. That's Lake Tanganyika. Then it goes through Lake Malawi. And remember, this is all the Rift Valley, right? All the way from the Red Sea, all the way from the Red Sea, all the way through Ethiopia, all the way through Lake Tanganyika, all the way down through Lake Malawi, and then out through Mozambique into the Indian Ocean. So that is the Rift Valley. I'm also going to show and share some images along with Adrienne's pictures, but also my own pictures from the very northern tip of Kruger National Park, which is right here. That northern tip is the Makuleke concession, and that's on the border of Zimbabwe and Mozambique. But this is Kruger National Park here, this area right there, which I'm circling. And I spent a lot of time there doing a lot of my guides training, but I will share images from mainly this northern region right here, which is actually one of the most rich areas of bird life for the whole of southern and eastern Africa, particularly when all the migrants have come down from North Africa and from Europe during their summer. So those are the key things I wanted to share just as far as the orientation was concerned. So Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, and some photographs from Zimbabwe, Botswana, and some from South Africa. So I'm now going to pop to share my screen to my presentation, which should work right now. I'm going to go from beginning. Does that, hopefully everybody sees that?
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect, wonderful. So, so again, thank you. A small bit about myself. I am a farmer by heart. So I was born and raised on a dairy sheep farm in the UK. I have been birding since I was 6, 7 years old, feeding birds out in the English garden. And that continued when I moved to Canada at age 14 when my parents emigrated. I'm a qualified teacher in Canada. I haven't taught since 2007. I did my Trails Guide training in South Africa in 2007 to become a level 1 and level 2 field guide and a qualified Trails Guide, which means I'm qualified to carry a heavy caliber rifle in South Africa, in the reserves and in the national parks to take you on a guided walked experience. I am the owner of Jackson's African Safaris with my South African business partner, David Lynn, and I've been doing this full time since 2007, basically planning, preparing people's itineraries throughout Southern and Eastern Africa. And I normally go and host or guide 1 or 2 a year myself as well. So today's presentation is a collection of images, ideas, stories, and shared research. So I'm just sharing other people's research along with my own observations and creating an opportunity for us to ask some questions, consider new ways of looking at things that we see and observe. We will take some time to appreciate their beauty while also look at the many challenges these birds face in their migrations in and out of Africa, especially in today's world. This presentation, half of it I put together for a presentation in Creston a few years ago, and I basically adapted it and added some more things. So I'm going to start off with a series of photos that I took of vultures, and 1 or 2 were given to me by Simon Tomset, who lives on Soy-Samba Conservancy in Kenya and is a very avid bird conservationist and does a lot of work in Kenya and is well known in Kenya for his work. And then I'm going to go on to share some slides on migration, and which also come from the Convention of Migratory Species, some of those slides, but they also come from Rael and Helene Loon, who wrote the Inside Story book on birds in Southern Africa. And then I'm going to talk about a personal encounter with a white stork I had in Kenya. And I'm going to talk about the story of the common swift A320 and the European cuckoo and their migration. So that's me sharing other people's research. And I'm going to talk about a non-African bird, the Swainson's hawk, for a few minutes, a personal experience I've had in regards to this bird. And then I'm going to talk about the Ethiopian Simien Mountains and the Lammergeier, the Ethiopian bearded vulture is another name for it. And then I'm going to share a series of images, like I already mentioned, of a guest of mine that went on a trip to Botswana and Zimbabwe. And then I will end with a whole series of images that I've taken for myself. And hopefully at the end, we'll have some time for some little videos and maybe just sharing some other things from my Instagram account. So to get us going here, when you look at this image, there's nothing that special about this picture. I'm not raving about my photography skills, but when you look at this image, what do you see? You know, if you're a bird feeding, what might you want to look like? If you've got your head stuck in a carcass, for example, or a dead animal, and there could be predators around, what might you want to look like? And I'm not suggesting anything at this point, but if you look at this image, is there something about this vulture and the way that it looks that could be intimidating, maybe to an animal that could perhaps come and catch this vulture as a source of food? Do you see anything when you look at that bird that could be mimicking perhaps something else? Is it more clear now, or is it just in our imagination? So if you look at this section of a photograph, as long as you can see my mouse moving, does it look like maybe 2 eyes and a nose? I don't know. Can you pick out any faces in this image? So if you take a look at this section of a photograph here, all these heads are inside a carcass, pretty vulnerable from maybe a jackal or any predator that maybe would take an opportunity to take a vulture. Could these be two eyes and a nose, basically looking like it's some form of larger animal or another species altogether? And when you start looking at this image, what do you see? There's a face there, maybe. So who knows? But this is an idea that Simon Thomset, as I said, a well-respected ornithologist in Kenya, was beginning to notice. And these are pictures I took, and I began looking at my photographs, and I began seeing his point. So if you look at this image, here's another one here. There's again picking out faces of potentially looking like or mimicking something else through evolution. So now these are the two taken by Simon Thomset for the purpose of illustrating his point. So this is a Ruppel's vulture. And so here's a vulture when it's got its head up. This is what happens when the head goes down. And so you can now see how this potentially could be two eyes and maybe a forehead. And if that head was hidden inside a carcass, how that could be looking like a series of faces or another animal. So who came first, the chicken or the egg, as far as evolution is concerned, is open to obviously discussion. But this is something which Simon Thomset brought to my attention when I spent some time with him at Soisambu, and it's definitely been around in discussion through different scientific circles. But when you look up, online, I just did this a couple of days ago, what is the difference between mimicry and camouflage? Well, I got my sources from the quotes I've from above there from ck12.org and achievethecore.org. It says, camouflage means that species have an appearance, color, shape, or pattern that helps them blend into the background. Mimicry is an adaptation in which a species uses appearance to copy or mimic another species. For example, an owl moth has big spots on its hind wings that resemble the eyes of an owl. Mimicry is an adaptation that creatures have that makes them mimic other living things. Camouflage is an adaptation that creatures use to hide themselves from other creatures by blending into their environment. So I think my point of sharing this is just simply to think of the options of what potentially happened in the evolution of vultures to get to the point where they potentially maybe have adapted the way they have. The last point there is, what is the difference between mimicry and coloration? There are two types of descriptive coloration: concealing coloration, or camouflage, in which the organism blends into its surroundings, and then obviously mimicry, in which the organism is not hidden, but rather presents a false identity by its resemblance to another species. And maybe that's what these vultures are doing, is they're using mimicry in some capacity, but open to thoughts and ideas. So moving on to migrations. This is an example of the Amur falcon. It's moving 11,000 kilometers. At most of that 11,000 kilometers, when it moves larger distances, will be over 1,000 meters in elevation due to the winds. It leaves the breeding grounds in August and September. And the Amur falcon is a small raptor of the falcon family. It breeds in southeastern Siberia and northern China before migrating across India and over the Arabian Sea to winter in southern and eastern Africa, where it will arrive in southern Africa in November, which is very normal for most of the migrants, and then departs again in May. And remember, southern and eastern Africa, southern Africa gets rain in their summer, which is basically November through April. So you can see the density of Amur falcons in that photograph. I just found this a couple of days ago, and there's the link that where this source was found. And I want you to look at, I don't know whether I find half my map right now is being covered by the presentation information, but you should be able to move yours off if it's the same for you. But if you look at my map here, you'll see where the Amur falcon is overwintering in southern and eastern Africa, and you'll see where it is moving for its breeding season in our North American summertime, and where it moves to breed. Now, I want you to remember that for some of the slides we're going to look at in a couple of minutes. So just remember that's where it overwinters in southern and eastern Africa, and then on the other area in India and China, etc., that is where it goes to breed. Just remember that. I'm going to come back to it in a minute. Because of a long journey, stopover sites are important for the Amma falcons to maintain stamina. In 2012, an estimated 120,000 to 140,000 birds were trapped in nets and killed while passing through a remote part of Indian Nagaland region. This prompted a swift response from the Indian government and the Nagaland Forest Department, which used patrols and education initiatives for villagers as a means to stop the trapping. In 2013, no falcons were trapped. So this is what I learned, and that's in 2012. An investigation revealed that thousands of Amma falcons were being trapped and sold for local consumption. And so obviously, poachers would suspend their fishing nets on long poles, and then the unsuspecting falcons would fly directly into them and get tangled during their migration. And so I think what I'm trying to share here is that a lot of people living in rural parts of the world maybe are looking for protein sources, and then often we in the West and in other parts of the world aren't always aware of the circumstances that a lot of people are living in. And it comes from, processes of education that we can obviously find alternatives for a lot of people. And the impacts obviously were very high on these falcons in that short period of time. Going back to that slide for one moment, remember what I talked about where the Amma falcon is overwintering and where it's breeding. If we now look at through the convention of migratory species, there's three key flyways. One is the American flyway between North and South America, going through Mexico, which you'll learn about in February with Cynthia and Pili. And then this one here, the African Eurasian flyway, which is most of the birds moving between the African continent and Europe and Northern Europe, etc., etc. And then the East Asian Australasian flyway, between Australia and all the areas north of it is shown in these three flyways. And then if you now look at that other slide I just shared with you, those Amma falcons were overwintering here, and then they were moving over here to breed. So that both the Amma falcon breaks this three major global flyways. So there is that like other ones which some birds naturally take, and that's my point there. So if it was this easy and Africa was only 15 kilometers away, many birds' lives would be a lot easier than the 10,000 plus kilometers many of them take. So I want to talk now about land bridges and just make sure you all understand what a land bridge is. And that is birds basically when they migrate will choose to cross land rather than water because there's thermals. And when there's thermals, they can move faster and they can gain higher altitude and take advantage of a lot of those trade winds and other higher altitude winds to move greater distances further and faster. And so the three major land bridges for today's presentation between Africa and everything north is obviously between Spain and North Africa, which is through the Straits of Gibraltar right here, which hopefully you can see my mouse moving. And then the Israel-Palestine area, Suez Canal area around Israel and the Red Sea. That's another key area. And then another one will be coming around the Arab Emirates there and down through the Horn of Africa. So those would be the three sort of fairly major routes that birds would be taking. You can see quite a few come through Italy there too, and then jump across from the toe of the boot into central North Africa there as well. So that's what I wanted to point out there. And if we just focus on the Israel as a major land bridge, you can see that nearly all of these birds that are listed here in examples from the 1980s, which obviously is a while ago now, but it'd be interesting to see how those numbers have changed. But you can see that in one single day, for example, 220,000 birds were recorded in one single day in 1983 of honey buzzards going through. Okay, and 320,000 in one season, 1981. 142,000 lesser spotted eagles, 37,000 black kites in 1980. And I guess one of the last things I wanted to point out here is when you think about the issues with the conflict, say, between Palestine and Israel and the ongoing communications, how does that conflict impact birds? How does it impact, survival of species over the long term based on how well the land is protected through a very difficult set of circumstances? And, it's problematic. And I don't know the answer to that. And I don't know necessarily the answers. But I did actually just listen into Castlegar, just south of Nelson here where I live, has the MIR Center for Peace. And there was a guest speaker just before Christmas, a Palestinian and Jewish individual living in Canada who wrote a book called The Wall Between: What Jews and Palestinians Don't Want to Know About Each Other. And these two gentlemen have been working together for many years in Canada, working on this book and also working with Palestinians and Jewish people in Canada, finding resolutions to the historic traumas that they've all experienced and trying to bring better understanding. And obviously that in many ways could actually impact long-term better options for sustainable bird populations moving through this area. So that was my point there, is there's a lot of things going on in the world which are related to sustainable long-term health of bird populations. So our mental health and our own lives as humans does obviously impact migrations, particularly when so many birds are passing through one very small area like that. So the next few slides are going to look at a series of maps, and they're basically just to visualize some species movements into and out of Africa, and some of their challenges will be discussed, like the one we just mentioned now. So the steppe eagle, we just have a very simple overview. All the blue area there is the feeding and wintering area for it, which includes India as well, as you can see. And then the yellow area is where they go and breed. And so if we look at the lesser spotted eagle, you'll see that, again, the blue is where it overwinters, and then it moves to the yellow area for breeding. And there's also a resident population shown in the green in India, northern India there. The steppe buzzard has a much wider, diverse range of all year round residency. So I grew up seeing buzzards as a kid growing up in the UK. Around here, as you see, as a year-round resident. But obviously, you can see that there were many that were overwinter in southern Africa and then go and breed in northern Europe and elsewhere. So a very diverse range throughout the world. The black kite, again, a huge diverse range of all year-round residency, and then others that obviously have an overwintering area and then migrate elsewhere to breed. So now I have a story about a white stork and its migration. That photograph came from Wikipedia, and you'll notice on that photograph, as I noticed, there is a band around its leg. And when I was in Kenya back in 2018, well, I've been 2 or 3 times since for my work, I took a photograph of this white stork. So I took this picture of this white stork right next to the Musiera airstrip while I was waiting for my flight back to Nairobi. And I was able to zoom in on that band on its leg, and I was able to get the code off it, HYG7. And I decided a couple of months later when I was home to do a little bit of research on that band and find out a little bit more information if I I could find anything out, and I did succeed. So if we look at white storks, that's their general overwintering is the blue, and again, they're breeding summer areas. But I was actually in Portugal a part of last winter in December and January, and they were also overwintering in Portugal. So their ranges and habitats are certainly extending into the winter seasons now in Southern Europe as well. So this was the research I did. I found out this information online, but this particular stork I took a photograph of was found in Budapest on a nest, and it was ringed with that ring, and that was in Fezia, Hungary. So that's when this lady here, I don't know how to say her name, but Mrs. Laszlo, with this email address, she was the person who actually got back to me. I emailed her, I found her information online, and she responded to me. And she went ahead and entered where I took the photograph of this same bird. And she entered that information online. So you can now go online where she entered the condition of the bird was alive and probably healthy, and certainly released, identified from colored or numbered leg rings. And the date of that was the 12th of April, 2018. And she wrote, and now you'll find my information online. And that bird was, when I took the picture, it was 5,621 kilometers away from where she had originally put that ring on the bird. Quite a significant distance for that large stork to fly. And there we go. So my conclusion, and all I really wanted to share from all of that, is this is not a lot of information from quite a lot of work from different people, but compared to what we're going to look at next. So I'm basically comparing putting a band on a bird compared to maybe looking at using some digital or satellite type systems to recording bird movement. So I'm now just sharing information on a common swift. So if we just look quickly at this map, again, their wintering and feeding area is in blue, and the yellow area is the main breeding area of the common swift. And then if we hop onto the study, where they used a geolocator on a series of swifts, particularly this one they call A320. And that link there is where you can read in more detail if you wish. But this is the journey of the swift. That's a geolocator. I got two examples there, and that isn't that particular swift, but it was just an image I found online. And another bird below. Those are just two examples of geolocators attached to birds. And there's the disadvantage of them is you do need to recapture that bird to retrieve the data. Okay, so you won't be able to read the dates on that slide, but I have the dates in front of me here. So as long as you can see my mouse moving, this swift was caught and netted in Cambridgeshire in the UK, up here, right there. And that was back in 2010 on the 23rd of July. And this is, remember, swifts are not landing. They basically, when they migrate, they spend 24 hours a day, all day on the wing. And so this is the journey that this swift took. So I want to spend a couple of minutes just reading out to you here how far, the dates and how long it spent and where. And so on the 23rd of July, 2010, it had the geolocator put on it. And then it moved between the 26th of July and the 28th. It made its way all the way down to central Spain. And then from central Spain, it moved all the way down to Western Africa here by the 1st of August. Okay. And then from the 1st of August through to the 15th of August, so within 2 weeks, it had found its way all the way down to basically the western side of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Okay. And there it spent basically from the middle of August through to the 9th of December in this area around DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, around this yellow area here. And then around the 9th of December, it headed off to this area here, where it spent from the 13th of December to the 21st in what basically, if you remember looking at the map, there was Lake Tanganyika, there was Lake Malawi. So it was kind of hanging around the border of Mozambique and Lake Malawi on the western side of Malawi right here. And then it left, and then from the 22nd of December to the 24th of January, it basically spent its time on the coast along the northern edges of Mozambique. Okay. And then it went from there all the way back to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where it spent from the 5th of February to the 6th of April. So it really likes the Congo. And you obviously hear a little bit of news about the Congo, and a lot of people consider it to be an area of obviously a lot of lack of stability. But obviously, this is a place where Swifts spend a lot of time, like a huge amount of time, in their yearly migration on the wing. And then from DRC, it left on the 6th of April, and then ended up spending from the 9th of April to the 14th, preparing, I guess, to leave and go over water to southern West Africa, where it spent basically the night of the 15th of April and the night of the 16th of April, 24 hours a day, heading over to hit land again in the south end of West Africa. And then it spent about from the 17th of April to the end of April, obviously refueling there. And then it headed up all the way to basically almost the border of Morocco again by the 1st of May, just 3-4 days later. And then amazingly, all the way through to cross the Straits of Gibraltar again between the 3rd and the 6th of May. And by the 7th of May, it was right up into northern Spain, and then all the way back up into Cambridgeshire by the 8th of May. And that is the journey of Swift A320 with the geolocator that was attached to it. And I think, that's an amazing story to look at, and all the land masses and the people and the cultures and all the different things you hear about all these different countries as far as we as humans are concerned, and economics and stability and war, and obviously all the beautiful positive things too of nature and wildlife and forest and rainforest and such diversity. And but yet, what a huge journey undertake to live their lives. Absolutely amazing, and all entirely on the wing. So jumping from the Swift A320 to the European cuckoo, I grew up in England hearing the cuckoo when it first arrived every year in the spring, and a beautiful call that you would hear in the morning. And that's just a basic map again to show you where basically their wintering feeding area in blue, and where they head to in the breeding season in the yellow. Huge area, as you can see. Here are five British cuckoos: Lister, Clement, Chris, Martin, and Casper. And you'll see, using a geolocator, you will see basically their routes that they took out of the UK down into different parts of Africa. You can see that basically 2 of them went through the land bridge of Gibraltar, and the other 3 went through Italy basically and hopped across there. So you can see again how land bridges were used. Satellite transmitters obviously give a lot more information about speed, distance, so they are definitely used a lot. And so when you look at Lister, this one European cuckoo in a little bit more detail, those are all the points and all the data that was collected, and you can actually go online and learn a lot more information about that was collected about Lister. They have a whole series of stats and that they collected, but how far it went, how quickly, at what speed, etc., etc. Again, quite an amazing journey for a cuckoo that we then hear as somebody growing up in England every spring and summer. So how do we assess and find out what is fact and what is opinion when we read things? And my point here is quite simple. I removed most of the information I used in my presentation that I gave. This is the link where I got this information. But basically, here's a Spanish wind farm said, the facts on this link said that that they are finding that this one particular wind farm kill between 6 and 18 million birds a year as they migrate through. And it's a lot of birds, whether it's 6 million or 18 million. That's a huge number of birds. Also you have to look at the evidence, and one has to do their research to find out whether that information is skewed or what is correct. But this is just an example of we as a society moving towards more sustainable energy sources, but what are the impacts of those sources? And I'm always, as somebody who loves nature and wildlife, and obviously involved in my travel industry, finding ways that I can leave a positive legacy and not a negative one in all of my choices. And so this is just an example of how do we actually know really what's going on? And my answer is, well, it's challenging. And so all we can all do is try and make the best choices we can. And I will look at that a little bit more as we continue through the presentation. My main response to conserving birds and biodiversity is how I invest in conservation, and I don't think it's always somebody else's job. I believe I have a responsibility, as I believe you as individuals do. And one of my decisions as a company is I'm now putting 10% of what my client pays, or at least 5%, back into community and conservation from every trip that I sell. And that is just an action I've taken to try and leave places in better shape than I found them in, because tourism, in many ways, has not been acting in that capacity. One of the simple ways that we can make a big impact as a society is making choices of what kind of food we buy. Is it organic? I'm not saying organic is always the right choice, as we do need to control some pests. And there are, as a farmer's kid on a dairy sheep farm, I know very well, and having an organic farm for 20 years in Vernon for apples, I know very well some of the struggles and challenges of farming organically. But my point here is if you look at the Swainson's hawk, which is obviously a bird that migrates from Canada and North America down through to Argentina, I remember clearly in 1996, 1995, 1994, when I was mowing the grass between our apple trees, when the Swainson's hawks would follow our tractor and would be catching mice behind the work I was doing. Well, I know that the last year before I went to university in 1996, there were no Swainson's hawks any longer following me. They'd all gone. Well, at that same time, I read the research that, over 30,000 Swainson's hawks were found dead over a very small area of Argentina. And so if you read this link here, or you followed it, basically starting in late August, nearly the entire populations of Swainson's hawks migrate south to Argentina and Brazil in huge kettles and flocks. Hundreds of thousands can pass by a single site in Mexico in a single full day. You will learn about that in February when you meet Zymphia and Pili for their presentation. I hope that you can join that. And the key point here is that in the 1990s, Swainson's hawks experienced an alarming decline in population in the western United States. This decline was traced due to the heavy mortality on their wintering grounds in Argentina. An estimated 35,000 birds had died in Argentina in one season alone, carpeting the ground with dead birds in some places. Like there were 5,000 dead Swainson's hawks were found in 5 square kilometers in one area of Argentina, is one of the articles that I read. This disastrous die-off turned out to be due to the toxic pesticide monocrotophos, I believe is how you pronounce it. And it was actually for controlling insects on sunflower fields. Now, I don't know, because I haven't done the research, but whether those sunflower seeds were for human consumption or whether they were for feeding wild birds, I don't know. But the point is is that when we do have options of buying organic, or when we do have choices, there are ways that we can severely impact long-term populations of birds. And so it is worth thinking about. But we as consumers do have a very large say and impact on the birds that we love, and are very much needed for a healthy ecology in the world, and healthy ecosystems. So that brings us back to Africa again. But that was just sort of a personal story of my experience with the Swainson's hawk and me living and working on my parents' organic farm. So I was in Ethiopia 2 or 3 times back in 2012, 2013, 2014 on different trips. And I was up in the Simeon Mountains. And you can actually, if you do some research, you can watch a David Attenborough documentary on the lammergeier, the bearded vulture. It is one intense bird. It lives on a steady diet of bones and dyes its feathers with blood red with soil dye, and giving it the reputation of one of the most mental birds in the animal kingdom. My visit in 2014 had me seeing a few flying around in stunning views during my 5-day hike in the Simeon Mountains. And when I visited the Simeon Lodge after my hike, one of the staff members of the lodge brought in a dead one that had got killed on one of the power lines, which had only just been put in place, funded by different organizations like the World Bank. But the problem with the power lines is that the two lines are too close to each other. So when the bird lands on the lines and then it turns around, the tail touches the second line and it electrocutes it. And so you can actually read that link there, and there's a whole write-up on it. But the sad thing is why wasn't the research done about how far apart should those two lines be? And even to this very day, people like Simon Tomset in Kenya, who took the picture of those two vultures that I shared earlier, he's got birds he takes care of in captivity, which are all electrocuted in Kenya, and it happens all the time. So electrocution is a big issue, and it is the same in Alaska with bald-headed eagles. Like, you find electrocution happening in many, many places. This is views from up in the mountains of the Simeon National Park. And as you can see, these are remote people living in remote small villages with very little access to anything. So bringing power into these communities was a big thing, which I believe, obviously the world sees it as progress, but obviously if we're doing it the right way, so we don't electrocute birds, is pretty critical. So this was the lammergeier, which I saw had been electrocuted. So moving on to a series of beautiful pictures. The first set is going to be images taken by Adrienne and her partner when they were on a trip in Zimbabwe and Botswana. And they also ended their trip in that northern area of Kruger National Park, the Makuleke concession, where I did all of my guides training, right on the Limpopo River, a very diverse area and one of the richest for bird life in the whole of Southern Africa, particularly when all the migrants are there. So they were there actually in the last 2 weeks of November, which I believe is one of the best times to be there, right before when the rains come, but where a lot of the migrants have already arrived for the overwintering. And here's one of the first pictures she shared, the black-collared barbet. It is a gregarious species, often acting in concert when driving off intruders and roosting together, up to 15 recorded in nest holes at a time. So again, this is her trip, her experience, and the pictures that she took. So this is a broad-billed roller. They drink like swallows, dipping their bills into water as they fly. The other roller, the lilac-breasted roller, or the racket-tailed roller, is one of the other two rollers that people often are very familiar with when you go out on safari. Beautiful bird. Kingfishers in Africa, a lot of them are not kingfishers. They don't catch fish. Most of them are more terrestrial, as in they are hunting insects and other such things in woodlands. So they are a woodland bird rather than a waterside bird catching fish. So it has been recorded as a host of the greater honey guide. The greater honey guide is a brood parasite. The female lays her eggs in a series of 3 to 7, usually up to about 20 in a season. Each egg is laid on a different nest of a bird of another species. Burchell's cuckoo. A cuckoo is one of about 30 species of birds in the cuckoo family. And unlike many old world cuckoos, cuckoos are not brood parasites. They rely on others to raise their young. Though they do have their own reproductive peculiarity, all members of the genus are, to varying degrees, sex role reversed, so that the smaller male provides most of the parental care. So they're not parasitic, but they do. The males are the ones that take care of the young. This is a crested barbet. The crested barbet feeds on insects, other birds' eggs, and fruits, and sometimes mice. They have also been recorded to have attacked rats and killed snakes. Crested guinea fowl. This species is monogamous, with probable strong and long-lasting pair bonds. Courtship feeding is common. Males observed to run 5 or 10 meters to the hen to present some particularly tasty morsel. I don't know how much work that would be, but I don't know if he worked hard enough to get his mate or not. Diedrich cuckoo. In Africa, the village weaver is a regular host of the Diedrich cuckoo. The Diedrich is an obligate brood parasite that has evolved to lay eggs that mimic weaver eggs in appearance. So what is an obligate brood parasite? An obligate brood parasite lays eggs in nests of other species and have completely lost the ability to construct nests and incubate eggs for themselves. Okay, so examples include brown-headed cowbirds, which we know about, and European cuckoos, which we just looked at in our other slides. About 1% of all known bird species are obligate brood parasites. Hooded vultures in moraine. This species has been uplisted from its previous ICUN status of endangered to critically endangered, since the species is going through a very steep decline in population, owing to various factors, including poisoning, hunting, habitat loss, etc. All the vultures are certainly struggling at this time. The Jacobin cuckoo is parasitic. Unlike some cuckoos, nestlings do not evict the eggs of the host from the nest, although they claim most of the parental attention and food, resulting sometimes in the starvation of host nestlings. This is a class cuckoo. It is a brood parasite, meaning that it lays its eggs in other birds' nests. Pied kingfisher. The pied kingfisher sometimes reproduces cooperatively with young non-breeding birds from an earlier brood, assisting parents or even unrelated older birds. He is a red-chested cuckoo, which is obviously different than the European cuckoo. The red-chested cuckoo takes on more than a single mate. It is polygamous, and the nesting habit of red-chested cuckoos is to use the nest of another bird, so brood parasitism. Southern ground hornbill. The southern ground hornbill is an obligate cooperative breeder, with each breeding pair usually assisted by at least 2 other birds. It is known via experiments in captivity that birds without 6 years of experience as helpers at the nest are unable to breed successfully if they do become breeders. This suggests that unaided pairs cannot rear young, and that helping skill as a juvenile is essential for the rearing young as an adult. So it's essential that they get that assistance. So southern masked weaver. The southern masked weaver nests in colonies. Males have several female partners. The southern masked weaver lays eggs of various color, and this helps it to evade parasitization by cuckoos, because the cuckoo has no way of knowing what kinds of eggs are inside the weaver's nest until it has entered the nest to attempt to lay one itself. Eggs of the wrong coloration are ejected by the nest owners. So it's obviously adapted by having different colors of eggs. So thank you, Adrienne, for sharing those pictures with me. And again, it's just an example of what she saw through her trip between Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Kruger National Park in the north. So now I'm going to be sharing just a series of interesting photographs and images I've taken over the last few years, which I've found interesting and beautiful in all kinds of different ways. So I took this photograph of a hole. This hole was in Samburu National Reserve in central northern Kenya. And the question is what kind of hole is it? Is it a spider? Is it a bird? What actually is it? Well, I had no idea at the time, but with some research, it was actually this guy, the Danaud's barbet, and it's actually its nest, so it actually makes a hole in the ground. So this is a small East African bird that feeds on insects, fruits, and seeds. It grows to about 8 inches and is equally at home in trees or on the ground. A vertical tunnel, 2 to 3 feet deep, into the ground with a sideways and upward turn leads to the nest chamber. I actually tried to find a diagram of this nest type, but I didn't manage to find one. But if you can just visualize that from my description, and in a striking dance, the male and female face each other on nearby twigs, twitch, bob, and sing like mechanical toys. So I didn't actually see the Danaud's barbet, but I saw that hole, and when I looked it up, I got this information on this URL that I shared there on Wikimedia. But I'm hoping that this video now works. So let's see. Can you please advise me whether you can see this? Can you all see this?
Currently, I'm still seeing your presentation.
Okay, this is good to know. Okay, so I'm going to share this screen. Let's see. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to share. Okay, so I'm going to reverse this video here. Let's go back. So this is a Danaud's barbet, Danaud's barbet exiting. Do you see this happening?
Yes, we can
Yes.
see it.
Perfect. There it is, coming out of the ground. So it's just come out of its nest, out of the ground, and it's about to fly off. And this was put online on Facebook by Rio, the photographer. So there we go. So hopefully you all got to see that. And I was happy to find that because I managed to find it yesterday. So I'm now going to share it again. You share. I'm going to go back to my presentation. Hopefully share. You should be seeing my presentation again now.
Yes, we are.
Perfect. So that's the Danaud's barbet, and there's a lot of barbets, right? So it just shows you how many different ones there are. So here's another one. I took that picture of the nest in the ground in Manamyanak Conservancy, about an hour and a half drive from Samburu National Reserve, which is where this barbet I photographed. So this is the red and yellow barbet in Samburu. And this guy lives in small groups with one breeding pair and several helpers for nesting. They build their nests inside termite mounds by drilling a hole through the side, so not obviously the ground like the other one. And all members of the group share in incubation. So that's interesting. So a whole group will share in incubation and parenting responsibilities. When the chicks are old enough, they will often stay with the parents to help with the next generation of helpers. So that's the nesting habit. So now this is a picture I took of an Egyptian vulture. You know, Egyptian vultures are a little bit more northern Kenya or and northern Africa. So it was the first one I'd ever actually seen in the Namyanak Conservancy. I saw this one quite near the Ratiti Elephant Sanctuary, where they take care of a lot of orphaned elephants. Quite near Samburu National Reserve in that Namyanak Conservancy area, and it was just wonderful to spend a little bit of time with this bird, with this pair of vultures, which I had never seen before, because you just don't get them further south throughout southern and eastern Africa. It's really just that northern Kenya area and then further north. So I felt quite honored to spend time with this guy. Golden-breasted starling. Again, they were very specific to that Samburu area, and I felt very happy to see to see these guys. This is the area of the Namingnut Conservancy. This is the Matthews Range. I'd never been here before. It was my first time. I'd been into Samburu Reserve before, so this was like a 20-minute flight from Samburu Reserve to get to the Matthews Range. And just to give you a little bit of history, this Matthews Range, these mountains in these little pictures here had, back in the late 70s, early 80s, about 4,000 black rhino. So these other mountains had like just this one area had about 4,000 black rhino. And now the whole of the continent only has about 7,000 black rhino. So it just shows you how over such a short period of time we have lost so much. And obviously birds vary and aren't in the same way affected. But I can tell you that this is a 20-minute flight from Samburu Reserve. This Namingnut Conservancy is run by the local community. There's a lot of goats. There's a lot of local tribal Samburu people with their goats and their sheep and running the conservancy. But there's a lot less wildlife here than in the Samburu Reserve, and it's run very differently. And so all those rhino and all the elephant at the time were poached by the people that are now the guides and people running this conservancy. And that's something openly discussed when you're a guest staying in any of the camps in these locations. Very interesting history for the area. And this is a very dry area that has only had rain about 3 times in the last 3-4 years. So and this was literally 2 weeks after they'd had some rain but I took these pictures. This is a vulturine guinea fowl, absolutely spectacular colors, and you really enjoy spending time with these guys. This is a series of photographs of the African spoonbill that I took. Actually, when I first got back into Tanzania right after COVID, there was only about 7 vehicles in the Ngorongoro crater in that November right after COVID. It will never be like that again, but what a special opportunity to be there. But what a delightful display this guy gave me. I probably spent half an hour photographing this guy and the light, the water, and everything else about this guy as he approached me in the vehicle was rather special, that's for sure. I think he knew he was being photographed and probably being thankful that he had a couple of years of break, because the Ngorongoro crater has about 200, 300, 400 vehicles a day, is very common. And when I was there right after COVID and things began opening up in October, November 2 years ago, there was only 7 vehicles that day, which was quite special. Last November, I flew into Lake Tanganyika, and you'll see I took a picture of a bird here. You can't quite see its head, but this is actually a palm nut vulture. A palm nut vulture is rare in the raptor world. More than half its diet is composed of plants, particularly palm fruits. This species was known as the vulturine fish eagle. The intensity of its color, of this bare skin found on this vulture's face, is affected by the fruit that it eats and also by its mood. There we go. So we have a moody vulture. The color can range from orange to bright red. Unlike any other vulture, the palm nut vulture has feathers on its head. So here is a series of pictures I was able to take, and you really can, what I feel, see it as one of the old world vultures. You look at the shape of this bird, and you think of, prehistoric birds, the shape of the skeletons that you see when you go to museums. I really feel that this one is an old bird, an old world bird, and very closely connected to its ancestors from long ago, and not so much changed as many other bird species have evolved. I felt very honored to be so close to this guy. Just even looking at the shape of its wings, the way it's flying, it does seem to be so like a lot of those pterodactyl dinosaur first flying birds. It just, the whole shape of it does seem so almost prehistoric to me. That's just my reading into what I'm looking at and seeing when it flies. Now, what's this then? This is what I've spent quite a few years here in the Kootenays volunteering on the osprey count on Kootenay Lake. 2 or 3 times every summer, I go out and circumnavigate the north end of Kootenay Lake and then the south end. And we now do the west arm as well. And we have all the osprey nest GPS. I think a lot of you would know that the osprey population in the Creston Kootenay area is the highest density in the world. But obviously, here's an osprey that I took a picture of just at the same time as I took a picture of the palm-nut vulture. So this one's on Lake Tanganyika. And obviously, these guys will obviously migrate all the way north into Europe to breed. And actually, a month or two after this, I was in Portugal and I saw one up there as well. And so again, the migration of all these birds is phenomenal of the distances that they cover. And obviously our human activity severely impacts and affects their well-being. So I'm about to show you a series of images of a pin-tailed wide-R. So this beautiful parasitic bird could soon turn up in your yard. That was the title of a New York Times article in 2017. But I just like the way that they described this bird. So I stole it and have written it here. So during the mating season, a male pin-tailed wide-R grows a plume of black feathers twice as long as its body. To impress a potential partner, he hovers in front of her like a helicopter, flapping his wings and dangling his long tail feathers like luxurious locks of hair. And I took this picture actually with Jackson Loisaire when I spent a week with him in Mamara in 2018, when I took that white stork photograph. And here you can just see that discussion of like a helicopter, and you can see the way that it's moving there. I feel quite beautiful to sit and watch this bird move around the vehicle like I did have those few years ago. So that is a pin-tailed wide-R. And they obviously lose those feathers once breeding season is over. And so don't expect to have that as a key ID feature because they will drop out. So I'm going to show you a picture now of a Barrow's eagle owl, which is the largest African owl, up to 26 inches in total length, distinguishable from other large owls by its bright pink eyelids, a feature that no other owl species in the world has. And it is a highly opportunistic predator equipped with powerful talons. Just over half of its known diet is composed of mammals, but equal or even greater numbers of birds, and even insects may be hunted locally by this very opportunistic owl. So this guy here, I took quite near one of Jackson's camps, Tangulia Mara, and the reason I really wanted to share this picture, not that, other than this obviously is a very beautiful owl and it's the largest one. One of the things that you may see or notice, if you look really carefully, is what's on the branch at its feet. And if you look very carefully, as I did not, I had taken these photographs and I did not notice this when I was with the bird. I noticed this actually when I was putting the Creston presentation together, and I chose to include this particular owl. And what did I notice but a hedgehog? So if you look at the feet of this bird, he's actually been eating a hedgehog, and I thought that was rather interesting. And that's how much of an opportunistic hunter it is, and it must be quite a prickly lunch at that. So that is what he was munching on there. So Lake Turkana is in northern Kenya, which I believe I pointed out to you on the map. And it's a very arid area, very little rain. But it is the whole of Lake Turkana, and the water that runs out of it is, again, a very important migratory point for birds. There's a lot of fish in Lake Turkana. A lot of Birdlife use it as a migratory way of moving north and south. And I had an opportunity to fly from northern Laikipia with Andrew Francombe, who has a long history with his family in the Laikipia area. It was his grandfather that flew Queen Victoria back to England when her father passed away. And though Andrew has followed in his grandfather's footsteps of really enjoying flying, and I felt very honored when I spent time at their camp. But he spent a day with me with their helicopter and took me all the way over to Lake Turkana, and we did an incredible day's circuit in his helicopter. And just seeing that arid aspect of this part of Kenya, which I'd never seen before, and obviously it's very difficult to access. And even though you can drive there, it's certainly a very long way in the middle of nowhere, and a lot of miles that you would need to take. But the diversity of species is low. But again, these are greater flamingos that you're seeing flying here. I had discussions with him about the impact, obviously, of helicopters and flying to go and see the birds, which they do. But I could certainly see how you certainly couldn't have more than one helicopter every other day without beginning to impact bird life in such a fragile environment as this, because they were definitely affected by the flight of the helicopter that we were in. And so you won't want a lot of tourists going and flying and disturbing that bird life, that is for sure. But certainly, what an arid, diverse area, but very important for the movement of birds. So this is the water, which actually is draining out of Turkana, going south and a long way south. And so this actually has small crocodiles in it. It has fish, and the diversity of, this is Andrew here. He was trying to capture a little crocodile. It was amazing how many there were around. Again, but having a look at the aridness of this area, we flew basically for a day from like northern Laikipia out to Turkana and back, and did a full circuit, and a lot of sand dunes, a lot of areas like this with camels. We saw about 2 or 3 different people just with a few camels, and that was it for about a whole 12 hours of flying and stopping and seeing different areas along the way. We actually went and swam in this little pool here, and it was full of tiny little fish. And again, an important food source for the birds moving through, some of the bird species moving through this area. All these little pools were full of very unique fish species. And this is all volcanic rock, as you can see. It's a very interesting arid area, but still critical. So some final words on from me in regards to managing ourselves, migrations, flight pathways over land bridges like Israel, like southern Spain, going through Morocco, with local and international human activity, negative and positive, are crossed by birds all the time. We need to think of them a lot more and our impact on them. Where do we put airports? When I was in Portugal and Spain last year, I was quite surprised how many airports and how many planes were flying yards above critical migratory stop-off points for different birds moving between Africa and Europe. And they definitely were affecting the birds and their feeding from everything that I was witnessing. So all these considerations are important. So our impact on birds internationally starts at home, where each and every one of us, with what we choose to buy, what we eat, how we choose to travel, our beliefs behind what we believe we are entitled to as a society, and the impact of these beliefs on the land around us. Key simple daily choices at home affect so much bird life. Bird-friendly coffee would be a great example. If all coffee had trees in the plantations, you go to places like Hawaii or a lot of coffee growing areas, you'll see there are no trees in most coffee estates. It's just coffee. And so there's really very few birds. When my brother lives in Mexico with his wife, right now I went to a coffee plantation this spring, full of large trees. The bird song, the diversity of bird species was incredible. So if we can all support bird-friendly coffee, those types of impacts make a big difference if we demand that we want trees grown in coffee plantations. So our consumer choices can make a big impact, and having sunflower seeds that are organic, if they're going to be sprayed with pesticides that kill Swainson's hawks, those types of things, we do have a small impact, simply by what we consume. And obviously things like domestic cats, whether we let them outside, and all these little things have an impact. And how we take care of our gardens, the types of lawns that we choose to have, all have little tiny add-on effects around the world as to how birds can survive or not survive in our current economy. So personal choices in how we run our business. I took an action that I was not going to take all the profit for myself. I've chosen to give 5 or 10% back into community and conservation projects for all the trips that I do as a business. And I give now, I collect now about $200 or $100 per trip per person, and I put that into restorative land projects to basically help with carbon offsetting, which is obviously a very touchy subject of really how legitimate a lot of those things are. And I've been putting a lot of effort in myself personally in finding very legitimate things to do. And I think most of the projects I've found have been where land has been destroyed and it really needs rejuvenating. And I think that's the best place to put some money, time, and investment, is trying to rejuvenate some land that's been lost, which I've even done on my own piece of land here in Nelson. I don't know whether Jackson has managed to join us or not, but if you are there, Jackson, I don't know if you're able to say hello, and I would know. But this basically brings me back to basically the end of my presentation. I want to give a couple of thanks, and after I've given my thanks, if some of you need to leave, please feel free to do so. But I will then change my screen and share some videos from my Instagram account. If some of you would like to stay a little bit longer, I'm more than happy to do that. So thank you, Larry and Krista and Nathan and all the BCFO volunteers for your time in helping me put this presentation together this evening. And I wanted to just remind everybody, in February that Xynthia and Pili down in Mexico will be presenting on the migration of raptors through Mexico, and they are organizing a trip where you can go and join them in October this year to witness that migration if you're interested. This is my contact information here, should you ever wish to reach out to me now or in the future. That brings me basically to the end, to the main presentation. So thank you, everybody. And I'm now going to switch my screen over to my Instagram account, and hopefully I will find that. And let's see, I'm going to stop share. So again, thank you, everybody. If you want to leave now, feel free to do so. But if you'd like to stay, I can still see that there's 54 of you there. So I will spend 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 minutes or so sharing a few more images and a couple of videos of a few images of mine on my Instagram account. So here's one of an African fish eagle on Lake Naivasha in Kenya. And I just wanted to particularly point out this lake here, Lake Elmantaita. It's on Soy Sambu Conservancy, where Simon, who took those pictures of the vultures, lives. And it's beautiful to spend time there, because you can be there literally by yourself and spend time with the flamingos, pelicans, and all the other bird life, and literally have the place to yourself compared to many other areas. And so if I ever put a trip together for you, choosing places where you can be uninterrupted, like here I am with my guests last year in November, where we are out on Soy Sambu Conservancy. You can see all the flamingos behind, and just lovely to spend time by ourselves, and choosing carefully where I spend time with my guests so you can have uninterrupted experiences is something I really try very hard to do if that's what people are seeking. Let's see here. I'm going to go now to a specific slide. Let's see. These pictures here, if I'm not going to share them with you, is from Ibira National Park in northern Argentina, halfway between Buenos Aires and Iguazu Falls, where I spent a couple of weeks last year. I spent 3 months in Argentina last year for pleasure, and I just worked remotely and spent some time following some personal pursuits. And I did go and visit Ibera National Park. And if you're ever looking for an incredible area with incredible bird life where we're doing a lot of rewilding, Ibera National Park is definitely somewhere to put on the list for sure. And obviously Patagonia in the south of Argentina is certainly another place to consider. I also spent a lot of time in Portugal and looking at bird life, and particularly the migration of birds from Morocco up the Spanish and obviously the Portuguese coastline, and the impacts of airports and buildings and tourism and hotels and all the types of things in southern Spain, southern Portugal, obviously does have a large impact on places for birds to stop and feed, and where the airports are located in Lisbon and all of these sorts of things. So these are things that I really looked at and did a lot of research on, and things that we all need to be aware of. And if we can influence protecting good mudflat areas and good feeding grounds for birds, it really is critical. And obviously, agriculture has a big impact as well on what type of food we are producing and how it's produced. And I see it very much a reality in southern Spain and Portugal, like I've been talking about. So the next picture I wanted to share is coming up. It's a little video. I'll share this one first. This is again Lake Almantita. Again, this was a benefit safari for Artists for Conservation Foundation, and this is Simon Tomset, who I visit with my guests, and he lives in a part of Soysamba Conservancy there. This is a crowned eagle that he has at his place that was electrocuted also by various power lines in Kenya, and just a wonderful place to spend time and be away from masses of tourists, which you just don't have there whatsoever. This is the little video I wanted to share. It's small. Can you all see that video? You should be able to.
Yes, we can.
You're great. So this is two African fish eagles, which is very rare. I think of all my 4 years in Africa, and you see fish eagles through any or most areas where there's lakes and water and fish. Like this was the first time I'd ever experienced them, in flight, taking each other's legs and feet, and then doing that aerial display. I quite enjoyed the clients and the boat drivers' chuckles and laughter as well. I first visited this area in the year 2000. My godparents farmed just above this lake back in the 50s and 60s. And obviously things have changed a lot from those days, but it's just incredible area of diversity, particularly for bird life, and doing morning boat trips on this lake is great. I think you've seen that enough. I could show a lot more. How's everybody doing for time?
Timothy, I wondered if we could maybe just see if anybody has any questions.
That sounds great. Perfect. Thank you, Nathan.
So if anybody does, you can unmute yourself or you can type it into the chat. I do see one. Sandra asks if you have a bird-friendly coffee that you can recommend.
Sorry, once again, please.
Do you have a bird-friendly coffee that you can recommend?
That's a great question. And I don't have an answer to that. But what I have been doing is I've been buying a lot of coffee when I travel, and it comes from places I know, and it's not available locally at home. But what I do at home is I buy generally all certified organic coffee, and underneath the certified organic regulations, there are very stringent rules of certain farming techniques. And so that is one good starting place, is to buy certified organic coffee. So that would be my answer to that, as far as a starting place. But definitely do some research and try and find. And it's not easy. I've done my own research, and it's not easy to find any coffee when you go into Save On Foods, into Safeway. It is really hard to find coffee that will say bird friendly on it. But if it's organic, that's a really good start. And if you can find one that is shade grown, that's even better. Shade grown coffee means it's grown in a forest. So that is another key aspect. And you'll find that a lot of organic coffee, the requirements are that it is shade grown as well, which means it's grown under trees, which therefore you can then at least expect some habitat for bird species as well. And I tell you, like, I've walked through coffee estates with no trees and you just don't hear birds. You go into coffee estates with lots of trees and shade grown, you hear a lot of birds. So these things internationally make a big difference. Are there any other questions in the chat?
No other questions in the chat. Does anybody have another question they want to ask?
So I will end by saying again, thank you everybody, and these were just ideas and a collection of pictures and information that I don't consider myself to be an expert. These are observations I've shared with you and information I've collected from different sources, obviously from my own pictures and clients and places I've been. I'm just presenting ideas for you all to consider when you plant your garden, or how you plant your garden, or what coffee you buy, or what food you're choosing to buy. But as a society around the world, we can make a significant difference to birds and their lives in the world. So that was my message of my presentation, as it were. So.
Well, and thank you very much for your presentation, Timothy. It was great. It was really fabulous to see all those pictures and stories, and see how massive some of these migrations, how epic these bird movements are between continents, and again, just thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yes.
I'm okay if you'd like to show some more pictures, but I wanted to mention that first.
Perfect.
There's a number of participants have had to drop off the call.
Absolutely. I'm after an hour, I'm sure they're more than ready to head off. Now, if anybody would like to spend a few more minutes, I'm more than happy to look at a few more things on my Instagram account. But otherwise, I will let you go. But if anybody would like to spend a few more minutes, I'm more than happy to answer any more questions or look at some more pictures. Or if you wanted to look at Argentina a little bit, or talk about another destination, or ask me any questions about anything, I'm here. I will say, I'll just share a couple of things here, and then obviously I will watch the numbers drop off quickly on the presentation list. But this area I will point out to you in Northern Kruger. This is on the Lavuhi River. It's that northern tip of Kruger National Park. It is one of the most diverse areas. Like, if you want to go on a birding safari and you want to go on an affordable birding trip, and you want to go to an area which has great diversity, that northern tip of Kruger National Park is one of the best places, firstly, to go walking with a guide with a heavy caliber rifle, and where you get out of a vehicle, you turn the vehicle off, and it's one of the most diverse as far as the fauna, the flora, and the scenery, and the different ecological zones within that northern area. It is so different than the rest of the whole of Kruger National Park further south of it. It's got fever trees, it's got fever tree forest, baobab trees, the Limpopo River, which is a huge sand riverbed most of the year with no water in it at all until it floods a few times a year. And you have big canyons, but a huge diverse number of species of birds congregate there every year during the rainy season, basically December, January, February, March, April, before they move north again to Northern Africa and into Europe for breeding. And it's just a spectacular place and area. This is where I am right here with this group last year on the Limpopo, on the Lavuhu River, in that area. It really is a stunningly beautiful area to be. That's the Limpopo River there. Doesn't look that scenic, but that is Zimbabwe on the other side, and it's a stunning area again, just to walk and spend time. That's the limit, yes. So
Tim, this is Eric Newton here.
Yes,
Can you hear me?
I can. Is that
Just
Eric? Is that
yeah,
Eric?
yeah. Just a question on that northern Kruger area
Yes,
with Porphyry, Crooks Corner, Punta Maria
exactly.
area. How many days would you spend there to get a decent sample of the, as you say, quite diverse bird life in the northern Kruger area?
Yeah, like let me re-emphasize that Porphyry Road, which separates the open public national park south of that tarred road, and everything which is north of that road is private. And within that private concession, though it was returned back to the Makuleki people many years ago. So it was a part of a national park. The Makuleki people claimed it back. It then became a private concession owned and managed by the Makuleki people. They lease it back to the national park, and there's 6 camps in there. One of them is the eco training camp, which does courses, which you could even go and do for 2 weeks, 1 week, a month. I did my walking trails guides training up there with Bruce Lawson, who was a phenomenal birder. Who like he was in the Guinness Book of Records with like 700 species of bird by ear continuously, which is quite a phenomenal set of skill, which I couldn't even begin to compete with 10 in a row. And so my point there is that area, when you cross the road, south of it's flat, the terrain, the trees, the diversity is low. As soon as you cross the road, as I said, fever tree forest, huge pans, baobab trees, big canyons, the Lavuhi River, just the diversity of tree species, unbelievable diversity. And that's why you get such a niche of bird species that ends up overwintering in that area. You just don't get it. You drive 2.5, 3 hours further south, it's pretty flat, pretty uninteresting, and just doesn't have the diversity that that area has. So to answer your question, there's a 5-star outpost lodge. There's a 4-star, 4 or 4.5 star furry tented camp, which was actually washed away back in I think it was 2012 or so, but has been rebuilt. And I spent time there last year, right on the Lavuhu River, very lovely. And that's, but it's a 4-star price. You're looking at now for almost about just under $1,000 a night to be there now in high season, all inclusive. Okay, which some people feel it's a bit overpricing that particular location and market, and I agree with that perhaps. But they also have another camp which is more like 2.5, 3-star, very comfortable, same area just down the road, and that's more, but just much more basic, and that one's a lot more affordable, and you can do all the walking from there, and that's the preferred trails camp. And so I would say, if I was to guide somebody and you were happy to sleep out in the bush, I'd set you up with somebody I know to do a couple of nights sleep out to give you access to areas which you wouldn't normally be able to get to if you didn't go for a sleep out. But after roughing it for a couple of nights, I would then go and spend like 4 or 5 nights at the Porphyry tented camp or the trails camp, and then just do drives throughout the concession and basically stop and then walk. But your goal is to walk and basically explore all the different areas like Lana Gorge, the Fever Tree Forest, the Baobab Tree areas, the Limpopo Riverbed. All the, and you need some of these areas take half a day to really drive to and from within that concession, and so you need time. Really like 6 nights to really give it good justice is what I would say. So a full week of, if you
Yeah.
really are a keen birder, and the time of year, obviously there's a risk of rain. I had clients from Nelson, BC, be there in December, no, January. They knew it was for rainy season. They knew that they had the heaviest rain ever recorded for a week before they arrived. And then they had the heaviest rain ever for 24 hours after their arrival. And that's when the whole camp got washed away and into Mozambique. And so, it can be very wet there in the wet season. But if you go late November, early December, most of the time you do just fine and you get that diversity of species. That was
Thanks.
a long answer, Eric, to your question. But a stunning area to walk, and you can definitely do it affordable by being at the Trails Camp. And I would actually rate it as one better almost than anywhere else for birding and walking and just the diversity that I've talked about. Yeah. Does anybody else have any other questions they'd like to run by me? I'm planning a trip right now for a group who I've worked with many times before. I just see this photograph here. This is flying into the lower Zambezi on the monopole side of Zimbabwe. And this is a spectacular place to fly into. We'll be flying into the Zambian side with this particular group that I'm working with. I've been in that side many, many times. And again, it's a very beautiful area to be on this river. Such a wide, large river makes the Fraser River look so tiny. But again, a stunning, beautiful area is the lower Zambezi Valley. If you are a keen birder, but also want to have experience with a lot of big game at the same time. As you can see, I grow a lot of my own vegetables and I try and grow them all organically. And it's important to me. And I know how much of a difference it makes to bird life. Here's a couple of birds that you might find interesting here back at home. I found this white crow on Slocan Lake. It was just very near the town of Slocan. And I took that 2 summers ago. And I'll show you one other bird I took a photograph of, and that is this guy. And I paddled Slocan Lake with a friend of mine, and here is a pair of peregrine falcons that I took a photograph of about 2 years ago, again on that same trip. And this pair was busy feeding one of its young, but had just recently flown. I felt very honored to see those guys so close. I was in our canoe, and they came and checked us out and flew all around us, and it really was a very special sighting. So there's lots of interesting birds at home and away, and I feel very lucky to have had the experiences I have with a lot of these different birds. I'm just going to go through here. This is a picture of the Samburu area. I was there last November and the November before, and that was the only 2 times they'd had rain in literally about 3 years. And so it was amazing how that area greened up after that rain had fallen. Because I went back about 2 weeks later, and it just transforms the area. I don't know how many of you have ever been to Morocco. I spent about 5 weeks in Morocco when COVID was still kind of just beginning to open up again after the main pandemic. And I had some incredible birding experiences on the coast. Again, a lot of them were along this coastline here. Basically, birds that have moved from southern Spain across and making their way down the coast of Morocco, particularly curlews and what have you. It was just spectacular to see all the different diversity of bird life moving down that coastline. I can share a few pictures here. This was some of the estuaries and areas where you could go and get oysters and different sea fish and shellfish, and where I was seeing a lot of the Moroccan resident and migratory birds moving past while staying at Oulidia, very beautiful, nice lodge there, where I was very well taken care of, and very beautiful place. Oh, I actually wanted to share this one here. I'll share it with you. You can hear some curlews here just now. There you go. Curlew. Can you hear them? This is when the tidal water was out, but This was in February 2 years ago. You know, I think I'm getting tired now too, so I might bring my little presentation to a close. But if you ever, any of you are interested, like in specifically Morocco or specifically that northern area of Kruger or any particular area, I'm very happy to do something more focused with a group of you or get together on a little private meeting with you and some of your friends if you wanted to look at a trip to a specific area. And I can obviously go into a lot of detail on any area that is of interest to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Timothy, again for that.
You're welcome.
So many amazing places around the world
Yeah,
to visit.
it's huge. It's huge, yeah.
And thanks to everybody else who stuck it out to the end.
Yes.
And yeah, for those on the call, join us next month to learn more about birds down in Mexico.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nathan, and to everybody. Take care and have a great night, everybody.